Seemed a bit quieter today. It's in the sun, yeah. Out sunbathing. Yeah, that must be it. So we're on to a new project, a new month. March is 5-week month. I'll run the portraits maybe about 3 weeks and then see if you want a bit longer. I may try and sort of squeeze a few more projects in this year, so perhaps do some shorter ones as well as longer ones. This month's theme is portraits, so I've brought various kind of examples of past demos, mostly past demos, some of the ones I've done myself, but mostly past demos. So what I'll demonstrate today is really a drawing demonstration. So I think most of you will have seen this a few times already, but it'll be a bit of a recap, a bit of a refresher. So this is the approach that I take to drawing portraits. Now you could use pencils, you could use paint. Some of the examples I've got, some of these are really just tonal paintings, so something like these two. This was done from a model, and this one was done from a photograph. I think with this one, and that was a very quick one I did for one of my students this morning, just to kind of illustrate this approach. So this approach is basically put a colour down or a tone down. So in this case, I just put the yellow down because my student this morning was working with wanted to do it with yellow to start with. So we put the yellow down all over, and then you just white bits back where the light bits are, and then progressively put the darker bits in. So the next tone was this kind of raw sienna colour, this browny colour, and then the next tone was the burnt umber, the sort of darker colour. So it's a way of building up an image tonally, or drawing tonally, really. You could do exactly the same with pastels or charcoal, but in this case I just use paint. There's some of these others, like something like this, I think was painted in a very kind of linear way. So these two, so what I did here was drew out the pastel pencil, all the main shapes, so you can still see some of the lines here, these orange lines, and then gradually build the portrait up, just gradually filling areas in and letting it extend out. So there are different approaches, or there's different times that I use different approaches depending on what I'm doing. Most of these from photos. This one was kind of built up from life, from the model, so somebody was sitting for us. And I think this was probably 3 or 4 sessions, so I probably just got the, this sort of stage to start with, and then gradually added colour. So whatever way you want to work, there are different options. What I thought I'd really show today though is the thinking process and the looking process. So it's pretty much the same. For me, I may rough in some tones to start with, but the looking process, I pretty much always start from somewhere from the eyes and the eye level. The same applies like if I'm sketching, so this was a sketch I did a couple of weeks ago on the train. A couple of people were sitting looking at their phones, and I pretty much always would start with the eyes and then work up and down and outwards. So I find that a nice way to work. So it's something like this. If I wanted to sort of put his head somewhere there, that should roughly place him. What they look for is his eye level. Okay, so in this case, I think the photographer is looking down on him. Do you want to? Yeah, go with that. I'll sort of stand on this side because the camera's that side, so I don't want to get too many more photos of the back of my head, videos of the back of my head. So what I'm looking for here is like an eye level. So in this case, it's roughly that. There's a little bit of an angle there, yeah, something like that. The other thing is in this case, there's a lot of forehead and not so much features, and that's because the photographer is looking down on him. So, there's probably a little bit of foreshortening here in his features. Looking at his head is very slightly tilted. So if I will draw on this, but if I was drawing through here, that's pretty much the middle of his features, and then that would be the middle of his head. So I could draw a line which is almost like a line of symmetry through his face. And as I say, eye level like that. The other thing about this eye level is, in this case, it's probably almost like a little bit of a curve. Or if I did the straight line, like the corner of his eye to the corner of the eye is going up that way, and the same here, that's going up that way. So we're sort of looking for something a bit like that. And if you wanted to do this on the photos, I don't think I particularly mind, particularly ones that I printed out myself, because it's easier to just print more, and I can always wipe that out. So that's what I'm looking for. So yeah, line of symmetry. We're actually seeing a tiny bit more of that side of the face than this. So this line just slightly further over here. So that's me setting it out, roughly where I want to work. From there, I find the easiest thing then is to start with the chap's eyes, and I'm thinking they're probably around about there. If I want to draw an eye from here, obviously I've got that little bit of an angle, the corner of the eye to the tear duct. So that's going to come up here and then sort of dip down that kind of top eyelid shape. So I find that a good place to start. And once I've got that, I can then look at how much of the white of the eye I can see, how much of the pupil and the iris, and how much of the white of the eye again. So I just try and plot those spacings out. So I think there to about there. And I could draw that, once I've got that, I could, before I draw the bottom of the eyelid, I can draw that kind of pupil and iris shape out, which is something like that. And there's a little bit of reflection there, but most of that can go fairly straight. So that's looking something like that. And then when it comes to the bottom eyelid, there's a tiny bit of a gap under the bottom eyelid. See a tiny bit of the white of the eye there, so I'm going to leave a little space there, and that will come up to there, and we're into the tear duct there. And then this side, that's curling up there. So that's that eye. I can't see the top of the eyelid, and his eyebrow is really right, you know, it's really sort of right into there. So that's pretty much the eyebrow shape. What we're looking for next is this shadow shape. So we've got a shadow shape to here, and that goes under there, that's to there. And then the space across the bridge of the nose, I'm thinking about to there. Now this is where I could check. I could check this distance, say from the tear duct there to there. So looking at the space between the eyes. If you've got a decent sized photo, which this is, you can use something like some dividers. And I've got 2 pairs of these, so if you want to borrow these. I can measure that distance. I'll just take that out for a minute, which is about that, and compare that. And that is about 1 1/4 eyes width. So this varies from person to person. I'm not come across anybody who's less than an eyes width yet. So check that out. So if you're less than an eyes width, definitely I'll check. But quite often people will be more than. So if that's the eyes width, it's about to there. So that's 1. So I'm thinking to start about here for 1 1/4. And then it's the same process really, looking at the angle. It's going to come up this way, I think, just very slightly. I can measure the eye. It's going to be roughly the same size, I would expect. And just try and get that shape in. Doesn't seem quite as curved to me, that one. So got that eyelid shape, and then work out where the white of the eye is. Rub that out so I can see. I think the white of the eye to there, and then perhaps to about there. And again, I can see all the way around his eye, and then some of it is, the iris is eclipsed by the top eyelid. So I can see that shape, but not all at the top. So a little bit of shadow in there. And then the bottom eyelid, again, it's just following that shape. There's quite a lot of space, quite a lot of the white of the eye I've seen here, which makes it look like he's scowling at it, and he looks like he's kind of looking up and scowling. Something like And again, his eyebrows are very tight, close in here, up to about there. Once I've got that, I then want to start to draw the nose. And what I'll do is, so if I've got a centre line there, for instance, working parallel to that, I can take that line up, and we've just got, it's just very slightly inset there. And on this side, it's pretty much in line. So that's about the width of his nose. The length of his nose, I can measure that, say from the tear duct to there, and just compare that. So it's a bit more than an eye's width, so just a little bit. It's probably about that. I'm thinking down to about there, the length of his nose. Another thing you could look for is the angle between, say, the corner of the eye and the side of the nostril. So that's another way of judging that length of the nose. So thinking something, I think that's about, right, we could do both if you prefer. And then once I've got that, the shadows are really just around the nostrils and just slightly, a little bit of shadow there. There's not much under there. And then just a little bit of same this side, a little bit of nostril shape there. I think I've done a great job of that, I'm afraid. And then you could do any shadows at the side of these. A little bit of shadow under here, bring some of that out. All good so far?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then working down, I would look at how much space between the bottom and, if I'm happy with that, I don't know if I am happy actually, but it feels a little bit wide, or maybe not quite long enough, but I could go back and check that. But once you are happy with that, keep this line, this kind of centre line, or if you need to adjust it, adjust it. Look at that space there to there, and I could compare that with something in the eye, and that is about the same depth as the eye itself. So that's about where his top lip starts. So we've got that very slight little bow shape in there, and then down to where his lips meet. Again, I could measure all this and compare it with something up here, but I'm just going to do this by eye. We've got that little shape, and then his bottom lip comes to about there. And the next thing to look at is where the corner of his mouth aligns with his other features. So on this side, it's pretty, running parallel to that line. It's about where the colour of his eye is, and it's the same there. I think it's about there. So again, it's work like these kind of guidelines, sketchy lines, thinking lines in. You can always take them out afterwards, or just don't worry about it, just leave it as a drawing. So that's roughly where I want his mouth to end. This, I think it's very slightly angled that way, so again, I've got a little bit of a guideline there. And then I can then sort of get that line where his lips meet. So I tend to draw a line where the lips meet, try and get that shape, because that determines how high the corners of the mouth are going to be. And then from there, I can then follow the shape of the top lip, something like that. Okay, where I've drawn over it, I can't see it, but it's something like that. It's quite a little bit rounded there. And his bottom lip is something like that. The big bits of shadow, particularly you'll find that there'll be more shadow on the top lip than the bottom, and quite often you get a bit of shadows in the corners more. Sort of here. What you'll also find is usually the bottom lip will cast a shadow onto the chin, so there'll be a bit of shadow under here, which in this case there is. A bit of shadow under there. How deep his chin is, again I can compare that with something in his eyes, maybe from the iris and the white of the eye, that gives me that position. So that's about where his chin is going to come to. And then to actually draw things like the side of his face, I'm looking at these spaces, how much space there is there to there, or there to there. And again, I can compare that with the eyes width. So on this side, it's about from the corner of the eye to the colour of the eye. So it's coming out to about there. On this side, I think it's a bit more. Yeah, it's about an eye's width on that side. So we're looking at about there. Yeah, so I've got those 2 points, almost like the widest part of the face. And it's really following that shape, that contour around then. Coming up there. Yeah, his jaw sort of tapers in a little bit here. So it kind of comes down reasonably, not quite straight, but straightish. And then at one point, like about here, is where his jaw turns. It kind of goes down and starts to come out. So I need to look at where that is in relation to his features, and it's across here somewhere. So that's about where his jaw is going to turn. So that's, if I get this, the shape of his chin, and then that is going to come up to about there. Yeah, all around to about there. So that gives me the basic head shape, and to get the top of his head, maybe go from there and just see how many times that fits in. So it's on, it is about where I've got it. And obviously like hairline down to about there. His hair, tuft of hair, got a bit of a Mohican or something going on there. But that's the sort of shape I'm seeing. In terms of his neck, so this side of his neck, again, I can check, maybe just drop a line vertically from the corner of the eye, and that seems to be about where his neck is starting on that side. We're basically just relating it back to something here. On this side, yeah, again, it's roughly the corner of the eye again. See a bit of a muscle there, and then his shoulders going up in that direction. Drawing ears, it's sort of finding out where these positions are. Oops. So his earlobe on this particular, I mean, if he was straight on, square on, I'd probably expect his ears to be down here. But because of the angle of this particular photograph, the bottom of his earlobe is roughly in line with the bottom of his eye. And I don't know about the top. I think I'd just have to judge that. It's kind of up here somewhere. So that's about where his ears are going to come up to, sort of, kind of in there. So it's kind of getting these positions first, but I find that the easiest way to work, kind of get in the middle and just work all these little proportions out as you go, and just keep adding them on. I mean, there are some books that will tell you to, you know, start with that and then subdivide and things like that, but it's very difficult to get all those divisions correct. And people vary such a lot anyway, so I find it much easier to work in the middle and work out. So anyway, that's pretty much how I approach it. Now I might not do that until I've got, you know, some rough colour and tone down, and then, you know, I might then sort of define things a bit more tightly with a smaller brush. But that's the looking process that I use. So if you find that, if that's useful, then, you know, it's quite a good one to have. I was thinking for this project, maybe another week I'll do a little bit on colour mixing, and there's a way of painting portraits called the Zorn palette, which is just very simple colours, just black, red, yellow, ochre and white. So I might have a go at that next week. Another thing we could do is maybe some quick sketches, maybe not do that today, but another week maybe do a couple of quick sketches of each other, sort of thing. I mean, I find practicing, you know, I do all this sort of thing just any odd moments if I'm travelling usually, just it's a way of keeping my skills. And if I haven't got a book to read or something, I'd rather draw with it. There's only so much I can look at my phone, so it's a good to keep your hand in your eye. You know, it's a really good way of building that hand-eye coordination, and just working just with your hand-eye. I'm obviously not measuring with anything like this. If I go out painting, I will measure structures and buildings and things, but something like this is just very direct, just try and, just see all the shapes and the proportions. So it's good to have different ways of working. So all feeds in. Anybody want to ask anything? No? Okay, we'll crack on.
Thank you very much.